Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Retirement Readiness Podcast. As always, we have Tim Reagan, the founder of Prairie View.
Hey, Katie.
And I'm Katie Umland, the head of marketing here. So thanks so much for joining us today. This week we wanted to have a super bright topic conversation.
It is so uplifting. I cannot wait to dig into this.
We wanted to, unfortunately, talk about dealing with the loss of a spouse in retirement.
Well, and I guess the light part of that is, I've been married 25 years in a couple of weeks, and there are some days when you're like, yeah, exactly, yeah. And not like I never think like lost, like she passed away, but like maybe I could just lose her at the mall or something,
for like a weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Which she feels that way, like way more about me than I do about her, I'm sure.
Yeah, she got the short end of the stick.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I guess we just kind of wanted to chat through. There's several different pieces of what goes into losing a spouse in retirement versus before retirement. What are the differences, before retirement versus in retirement?
Yeah, well, and obviously, this is a topic that nobody really wants to talk about. Nobody really wants to think about. But what typically happens is, if I'm pre-retirement, I kind of have a sense of what my risk is. Like I think about our family, Sarah being a stay-at-home mom, that's been her profession her entire career. If something were to happen to me, she's left thinking about, man, how does income come in and what happens to the business and those things. It's kind of clear. As people get into retirement, however, sometimes those lines start to become less clear, and they don't really think about sometimes those risks that they have from a professional or from a money kind of a perspective. And so when we look at that, sometimes we have to remind people that there are real risks there, and it's not just the physical or the emotional, I'm losing a spouse and all that stuff. There really is some financial risk there as well. And so the biggest transition that we see is many times people get to retirement, think, oh, let me check that off the list. I don't need life insurance anymore.
Yep.
They're not working anymore, that stuff. But they don't think about, well, if something happens, I'm going to lose some income based on Social Security going down. I'm going to potentially, it's not as much anymore, but there are still people with pensions that they might lose some pension income. And so there's real financial risk that happens even in retirement that sometimes people just don't think about.
So going back to kind of that, the life insurance piece, how does that work when you retire? I guess, like, does that just naturally, do you have to like close that account? Do people still hold on to those accounts?
Yeah. So, good question. So there's really kind of different types of insurance. One of the types is what's called term insurance, which only lasts for a term of time. But then there's other types that are what we would consider permanent insurance, which come in different varieties. Sometimes it's whole life, sometimes it's universal life. But when we say permanent insurance, it's designed to be there for the rest of your life. So, for example, in our situation, I have some of that permanent insurance because there's things that Sarah and I want to do long term that we want permanent insurance to do. But I also have a real kind of a boatload of term insurance because, as we talked about, the big financial risk is between now and when I retire, but then that kind of goes away at that point. Some of it does, at least. But we still have some of that permanent insurance to help cover some of those other things. Like, for example, Social Security. One of the considerations is you'll lose the lesser of the two Social Securities when one of your spouses passes away in retirement. So when you think about that, if you're used to just saying I have $5,000 a month in Social Security income, and now a spouse passes away and I only have $3,000 a month in Social Security income, that's a pretty big loss that you have to kind of account for and think about.
Again, do I sell the house and downsize? Do I?
Well, that's a whole different conversation, right? Like,
that it starts opening the door to a lot of.
Well, and really what we try to do is the same, you should have the same hat on, in our opinion, the same hat on as before you retired, of selling the house and downsizing should be a lifestyle choice, not a forced into, I have to do this choice. The idea is that you want to try to set your spouse up in a way that they can continue to have the retirement that you guys wanted, really whether it's one or two, and not have money be the reason why things have to change.
Sure. So outside of the obvious things, the emotional loss, the financial loss, what are some of those hidden things that people might not think about?
There's lots of them. It's kind of like I think about it like the problem behind the problem. You think of like the big things. So as an example, if I have a sink that's leaking, it's very obvious I have to get that leak fixed, get a plumber out, get the leak fixed. But what I maybe not am not thinking about the problem behind the problem is that where that was leaking now has dripped into the basement and has created
Created mold
yeah, or
and
some other issue, right? And so many times what we'll see is, I hate to say it this way, but it's almost like the wrong spouse dies first, where you have a couple and they fully expect and they put all these plans together that say the
mm,
husband's going to die first and then he doesn't and the wife passes away first
mhm.
and now all of
And
a
he has
sudden
no idea how
it's
to turn the washing machine on.
yeah. Or well, we had one couple that that the wife had passed away first. They did not expect that, and this was back when he still got checks and everything. And he went to deposit a Social Security check, and the bank refused it because the signatures didn't match because he had never signed
He
it,
never
signed the back of his check to
It was
deposit.
always
It was
her.
always her, yeah. And so we spent time having to teach him how to write a check, how to balance a checkbook,
Oh yeah.
that's that stuff. So part of it is that, but even beyond that, what we find is, and you probably have seen it, whether it's at church or other places, where I like to think of it as two halves make a whole. There are times when you see that older couple that might be maybe in their late 80s or so, and you're like, man, I don't know how they do it, and it's each individually could not.
Right.
But between the two of them, the two halves make a whole. And now when one passes away, they don't realize that the half can't survive on their own in the house doing the
Or
things that they're
don't
doing.
want
Don't
to.
want to, all kinds of
It's
stuff.
like, die of a broken heart.
Oh yeah. Oh well, and that's the other thing for sure. Well, and when you think about that, from a social perspective, many times as people retire, their social network over the years becomes smaller.
Hmm.
And so now all of a sudden, if you're older and in retirement for a while, and your partner in life passes away, your social network is like
Nothing.
gone
Yeah.
practically. And so now, many times that's the conversation where you say, is it time to start looking at some sort of community living?
Hmm.
To where you can have built-in social network, whether you physically need it or not. Sometimes having that social,
Or even before one of the spouses passes away, maybe that's a conversation you're having about retirement. Hey, what does our retirement look like if one of us does pass away? Does that change, and should we start there?
100%.
What
Yeah.
do we want to be in a community versus not? I think about that often, like you said, kind of the wrong spouse dying first. Like our mom is set up to live to be 95.
At least.
And and so I kind of feel like I'm set up to be 95 and Alex is not.
Yeah.
But that's just what I have in my head, and
Yeah.
I think all the time like I assume that's what's going to happen, but
What
what
if
if
it
it
doesn't?
doesn't?
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure.
And
Well, and,
that's
and there too, I even think about, a lot of times, there are all of those things that when you're married for a long time, you just become a machine that works together seamlessly.
mhm.
You just know who does what. You don't know what they're doing. You just know it gets done, right?
Yes.
And I always go back to right after Dad died, and you were
We're
living at
brother and
home.
sister.
Oh,
We
is that
always
would that be
forget.
helpful?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
always
yeah.
forget
That
that
would be
maybe
helpful to
somebody
let
doesn't
people
know
know.
that.
Yeah. And so I remember right after Dad died, and you were going home. You were at home with Mom at the time, and you called, and they're like, "Hey, Ma, do you need me to bring anything or pick anything up?" She was like, "Yeah, bring a boy home."
Yeah.
And you're like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, we have a mouse in the skimmer. We need a boy to remove the
Yeah, out
mouse,
of the
right?"
pool.
Yeah. And so it's like the little things that you don't
Don't
really
even plan for.
plan for or think about. And those are the unexpected things that now it's not that you can't overcome them, but it's harder when you're in retirement to overcome those things. Uh,
And you're already older and you're already feeling more vulnerable potentially.
exactly.
Or yeah, I think often, like you said, you don't even know what the other person's doing because it's just worked for 50
Yeah.
years, and so you don't even realize. I think about all the time, Alex does everything with our finances, really, and
Sure.
I have no involvement. I mean, if I wanted to know, he'd tell me, but I don't
Hmm.
really want to know.
Yeah.
He has
Yep.
stuff he doesn't want to know that I'm doing. I don't even know our passwords for
Yeah.
half the
Exactly.
things, and it's like I don't even know what he's doing, and that can be feel scary.
Well, and a lot of times, I mean, the kind of a shameless plug for us, but that's where a financial advisor many times can come in and can be the conduit between spouses to where, a lot of times we'll see clients sit down, and one of the biggest values that we add is in saying, if you have anything that goes wrong, all you have to do is come here and we
Mhm.
will help take care of this, right? Now, we're not taking your passwords,
Yeah,
but we can help you to know here's where all of your assets are. Here's how it's working right
right.
now, and can help to smooth that to be a conduit there. Uh,
And if that fails, just have a book of knowledge.
yeah. Oh,
So,
exactly. Well, and with that, it's funny that you say that. That's a project that has been on my mind for a long time at our house that I actually started in the last couple of weeks. And it's a file on our computer that's called Tim's Brain Dump.
yep.
So that if there's and it includes all kinds of stuff. It's not just the money stuff. We happen to use a password keeper. If you're not using a password keeper, not sure what that is, that's a great way to kind of solve the problem that you're talking about, Katie, where the spouse just has to direct you to here's where it's at.
Yep.
We happen to use one password, but there's lots of them out there that are reputable. And so then by logging in, all I have to do is in my note tell Sarah how to log in, and then she has access
To
to
everything.
everything. But it's even silly stuff like you talk about the pool. Laying out my weekly program with the pool so that
Yeah.
she knows what chemicals to add when. That's something I accumulated over 20 years of owning a pool. Why have her start at zero type of stuff?
And if you don't want to do any of this, this is how much it costs to have somebody
Exactly. Yeah.
come and do it for you.
Well, and as you say that, it really does become that because it turns into over time, I've also developed relationships with vendors.
Yeah.
And so, hey, if you don't want to do this, here's who I think you should maybe look
Hmm.
to do those things, just so that if something ever did happen, it's much easier. And what happens is people get to retirement age, that almost gets even worse because a lot of times, as you think about what you're doing in retirement, you're doing gardening and housework and all that kind of stuff. Well, maybe you used to have the lawn always mowed by a service when you were working, and then you retired and you're like, oh, I like mowing the lawn. Let me do that again. Well, now where do I start
Where
to
to
get
start?
somebody? That kind of stuff. And so, I think that when you lose a spouse pre-retirement versus post, there are some very real differences that happen that you should be aware of.
Well, and even going back to, those vendors, even just writing kind of trusted sources down in
Yep.
your book of knowledge. Like, if I have a question about the furnace, this is who I
Who I
first
call.
talk
Yep.
talk to, or this guy always tries to upsell,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
or kind of
No,
whatever, kind of
exactly.
going through all those, listing out those different
Yeah. Well,
things you might think about.
unfortunately, in our house, Sarah handles most everything. So I
Yeah.
don't that book of knowledge on
Your
my
book of
part.
knowledge is this
Yeah.
big, or
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
this
No,
big?
exactly. Which if is kind of funny because the kids always know if Sarah's not around for a while, they're like, "This
This
ain't how
is the
this
wheels are
goes."
falling off. The
Yeah.
wheels are falling
Yeah. Yeah.
off.
They tell me frequently, "Yeah, we know why Mom stays home now, and you go to work because this
Yeah.
just doesn't work." So.
Okay, but what about some mistakes that you often see people making? Like what feels like the most kind of detrimental that you see, or
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a couple of things, and the mistakes kind of fall into two different camps. The first one is kind of what we are talking about. What mistakes happen pre spouse passing away,
Mhm.
right? But then the other mistakes that can happen is post somebody passing away. And there, what we find many times is a spouse that starts making decisions too soon.
It kind of goes into panic
Yeah,
mode.
well, and not even panic mode. What we've found is that many times when you lose somebody important to you, you can feel like you were there. You can feel like, man, I'm sharp. I'm making decisions. I know what I'm doing. And then you wake up 12 months later, and you're like, that 12 months was a blur.
Yeah.
I don't even know where I
You
was
feel like
at.
you were
Like
in your right mind.
you do,
Yeah.
and then you're like, I don't even remember chunks of that time
Yeah.
period. Uh, and so, what our encouragement is for any big decisions, there is no rush. Put off the big decisions for 12 months. Give
Big
yourself,
decisions like downsizing your
yeah,
house.
do I sell the house?
Do I
Do I start like, okay, my spouse has passed away and maybe I had an insurance policy that they left for me. I'm going to give all that money to my kids.
Yeah.
Sounds really good. That would be really nice. Maybe get to the grandkids or whatever. Uh, but no, you need time to let the dust settle a little
Hmm.
bit, really settle into what you think the new reality looks like, and how do we adjust from that. Um, the other things that when we talk about mistakes that we see people make sometimes on the front end is, and it kind of links in with kind of the wrong spouse dies first. Sometimes people have choices with things like annuity payouts or pension payouts or those types of things, and they assume a certain outcome and they make certain choices there. So, for example, I may have a pension that I could choose where I get the full pension while I'm living, but if I die, my spouse gets nothing. Or I can take less than a pension, but if I die, my spouse gets some. Well, those are financial calculations that we can help with. And many times people go into those thinking, oh, there's only one or two options. I'm just going to choose one that seems right. And in the end, ultimately, they end up in the wrong choice. And so on the front end, when you're getting into retirement, having kind of this mindset around, how do we plan for that and how do we maximize what we're given in our retirement benefits, can making the decision there can drastically affect the outcome for the remaining spouse. So.
And when you say like before retirement, like are you meaning like in your 30s, your
Yeah,
40s?
so those decisions are usually made at time of retirement. So I'm
Okay.
getting ready to go into retirement. The year before I go to retirement, here's when I start making
Okay. Start
some of those
setting up
decisions.
for, okay.
Yep. Uh, yeah, and really, when you think about uh, what does that look like? What does post spouse kind of life look like? It really still comes down to lifestyle desires. It comes down to what do I want to be doing in retirement? It comes down to how do I want to spend my time and all of those things. And so that's why we would say you don't know what that's going to look like. So don't make those major decisions that are hard to unchange until you give yourself some time to just catch your breath a little bit. And
Yeah, I feel like it's such a heavy topic and there's so many obviously like you don't know which spouse is going to go first. Like all those things can make such a difference, but I feel like setting yourself up with a book of knowledge and having some especially a trusted financial advisor. I know that's the business we're in, so it sounds cheesy or corny, but that I mean that's a huge piece of
well, and what happens is, and again, not to upsell a little bit, but what happens is, as an advisor, as a financial advisor in particular, we typically are the link to many parts of your business or parts of your life. Meaning, we know who your accountant is, we know who your attorney is, we know where your banking relationships are. So there's a
you can talk to the kids
correct,
before and
yeah,
after. You can kind of work as a middleman or like delivering some news
yep,
or
yeah.
or kind of helping to have those
No,
conversations.
100%. Well, and that's one area where, when we talk about mistakes that sometimes people make, sometimes people keep the kids out of their financial matters. They like which I don't necessarily all the way understand, uh, because it's a way for you to pass on your legacy, pass on your thought process. You've accumulated things over the course of a lifetime, and you've accumulated knowledge. So many times sharing what you have with your children not only can help them grow, help them to develop their knowledge base, all that kind of stuff, but really it can help set you up so that if something happens to one of you, it's much easier for them to step in now. And now it's like you have somebody else that you can lean on to help make decisions. And one of the biggest things we hear when somebody loses a spouse, their biggest loss in that is now everything falls to me and I have nobody to talk to about it.
Right.
And so sometimes broadening that circle a little bit, and that I wouldn't say share everything with all of your kids, but if you can say, somebody knows what's going on,
And we both trust them and we both made this decision together, like kind of gives them
exactly,
some time to ask the questions to you before you pass away or
absolutely. Yeah. And so a lot of times we'll even offer with our clients to have a family meeting, to sit down and kind of lay out. And it does not have to be detailed, does not have to say, they've got $200 in this account type of thing, but it can lay out broadly, here's how it works. And then usually couples will pick one person to be their trustee or their power of attorney. And it's with that individual that we share more of the details so that if something ever happens, it's a much easier transition.
I can remember even mom and dad having some conversations when dad knew he was sick, kind of saying, hey, look, this is what I laid out today. Things are going to change.
Yep.
Like, so we trust him, obviously, like having those kind of thoughts too about like, hey, we set this up now, but this is a trusted advisor, I feel like can.
Well, and to that point, many times as people put together their estate plan and they're choosing, who do I want to be my healthcare power of attorney? Who do I want to be my
Mhm.
financial power of attorney, those things. The problem is that I love all of my children the
Right.
same. I don't want, child number three to feel like, what, did mom and dad not trust me to do that? They always pick child number two or, whatever. And so sometimes having those family meetings, while they're uncomfortable, it's not fun, but sometimes it can help to explain what the logic and the thought process is behind it, so that just everybody's on the same
Well,
page.
especially before the emotion of losing a spouse or a parent comes into play. And now
Hmm.
you're also trying to have this emotional conversation also.
Yeah,
So,
no,
all
exactly.
right. Well, let's wrap up this very light
Hard, yes.
conversation. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
I think the only closing thought that I have is that usually it's a much more daunting conversation than people think it's much more daunting than it really is. Many times with just 45 minutes with your advisor can really go a long way and prepare you. And the other thing is, I think next time we're talking more about like hobbies and fun things to
Yeah.
do in retirement. So,
So it's not always about
yeah,
this.
it's not going to always be doom and gloom. We'll have some fun stuff too
But
coming
I
up.
think it's kind of to your point, that's one of those things where it's been on your mind and it takes up so much of your mind space where if you would just sit down and address it for 45 minutes and then you can kind of check it off and get it off your list and you're like, "Oh, that wasn't as bad as I
100%.
made it seem." So,
Yep.
yeah,
No.
I can understand that. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. As Tim said, our next topics are lighter, a little bit more hobby focused. So we hope you stick around for the next episodes. If you found any of this valuable, please like and subscribe to our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, and we will see you again soon.